Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. I hope you're having a good day. We have been studying patterns and algebra in class recently. And algebra, I believe, is one of the most misunderstood topics in mathematics. All algebra is a way of representing and describing patterns in the real world. And the kids actually have done a lot of algebra throughout school. They might have just never really realized they're doing it. So what we've been doing is we've been studying some patterns and representing them in all sorts of different ways and learning the language of algebra. Let's take a look at a couple of examples we've done this week. So I'm going to start with this pattern right here called circle time. And what I asked the kids to do was take a look at the pattern and see how the pattern is increasing. So right here, figure 1 has 2 circles. Figure 2 has 4 circles. Figure 3 has 6 circles, and figure 4 has a total of 8 circles. And then what we've been doing is we've been representing these patterns on these pattern investigation sheets. So one of the first things I'd have them do is actually draw the pattern on here. I'm not going to do that right now because we've got the pattern right there. Okay, so that's one of the things I'd have them do. Then what I'd have them do is I'd have them represent this pattern on a table of values. So this pattern was comparing figures to circles. So that's what we'll call it in our table. We'll call this column figure. And this column circles. And we're also going to get in the habit of assigning each column in the table an unknown. Typically we'll call figure X and circles Y. That doesn't have to be called that, but that's typically what we'll call it. And each of these represents an unknown number. Now, for our pattern, I've said go up to 5 figures. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in figure 1, there were 2 circles. In figure 2, there were 4, 6, 8. And even though number 5 wasn't drawn, we can assume that the next one will be 10, because that leads us to the next question. Describe how the pattern is growing or changing. So for that situation, we'll look at the Y column. We can see that the pattern is increasing by 2 every time. So we can say something like this. For every figure, the circles increase by 2. Period. That's how the pattern is growing or changing. But the thing we're really interested in is we're really interested in something called the pattern rule, or I like using the language of algebra. I like calling it the algebra expression. So that's what we're interested in. Now, what the pattern rule or the algebra expression talks about, it talks about what's the relationship between figures and circles, or what's the relationship between X and Y, and it has to be the same every time. Now, if you look here, what do I do to 1 to get 2? Well, I could add 1 to get 2, but the problem is that doesn't work on the next one. For the next one, if I did 2 plus 1, that doesn't equal 4. And 3 plus 1 doesn't equal 6. So for the pattern rule, it has to be the same every time. So very quickly, the kids pick up on if I do 1 times 2, that's equal to 2. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. 3 times 2 is equal to 6. 4 times 2 is equal to 8. 5 times 2 is equal to 10. So that's the pattern rule or the algebra expression. It's the figure times 2. So I'm going to say figure times 2. But I like to try to get the kids writing this in an algebraic way. Now here's how you would write figure times 2 as an algebra expression. Since we're using the variable x to represent the figure, x doesn't mean multiplication. As we get into higher levels of mathematics, we stop using the multiplication symbol. So to show figure times 2, I would just write, this is how I show figure times 2. I would write 2x. And this x doesn't mean multiply, it means the figure or the unknown number. Together with the 2, that means 2 times the figure. And that's how we represent multiply by 2 as an algebra expression. It's a little bit different terminology to get into, but we're just starting it now. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the pattern rule or the algebra expression to show the 10th term in the pattern. What that means is we want to show how many circles would there be in figure 10. So what I would do is I would write the pattern rule or the algebra expression 2x. And to show 2 multiplied by the 10th figure, I'm not going to use the times symbol. I'm going to use something called parentheses or brackets, and I'm going to go 2 times 10. These parentheses, as we get into algebra, parentheses start to mean multiplication. 2 times 10, which is 20 circles. So it's some different language to learn and a different way of, or different written language to learn. The written language of algebra doesn't use multiplication symbols, it uses parentheses to represent multiplication. Now the next thing we're going to do, number 6, is we're going to write 5 ordered pairs and graph the pattern. Well, an ordered pair is an x and y value that represents a point on a graph. We can get those x and y values from this table. When x is 1, y is 2. When x is 2, y is 4. When x is 3, y is 6. When x is 4, y is 8. And when x is 5, y is 10. All of these things that we just made represent points on a graph. Let's graph it now. This is our one quadrant of our coordinate plane. This dark horizontal line, this one right here, is called the x-axis. So we call that the x-axis. And this vertical line is called the y-axis. Now what we're going to do is we're going to label our x-axis. Now remember, our x-axis is called figure. So we'll call it figure. And our x-axis is going up by 1s. Now where the x and y axis meet, this part right here, that's 0. Now, you can see in our points that the x's are going up by 1s. So that's a really easy axis to label. Now I want to make a nice big graph. So I'm going to skip a line and start right here. And where they cross, I'm going to say that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 right there. That's going to create a nice large graph for us. Now I'm going to check my y values, which are my circles, which reminds me, I forgot to label that on my y-axis. So over here, I'm going to call the y-axis circles. And if I look at how my y-axis is increasing, it's going 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So if I wanted, oops, wrong direction. If I wanted on my y-axis, I could say here, okay, I'll start at 0, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And now I'm going to label my points. I always plot the x first and the y second. So my first ordered pair is 1, 2. 1 on the x, 2 on the y. So I'm going to go across 1, up 2. Right there, I'll put a point where they cross. Call it 1, 2. Next, I'll do 2, 4, right there. Where they cross, I'll put a point. I'll call it 2, 4. Next will be 3, 6. Where they cross, I'll put a point. 3, 6. Next will be 4, 8. Where they cross, I'll put a point, call it 4, 8. And then finally 5, 10. Cross 5, up to 10. Where they cross, I'll put a point, 5, 10. And you can see when I graph this algebra, I get what's called a linear relationship. This algebra expression, this algebra pattern, makes a straight line. So there's so many different ways I can represent this algebra. I can represent it as a straight line on a graph. These points are the points on that graph. I can represent this algebra as an algebra expression, 2x, which means the figures times 2. That's what this pattern is. I can represent this as a pattern in words. I can represent this as numbers in a table, or I can represent this as pictures. Algebra, it's the language of patterns. I'll have more videos on algebra and more patterns we'll look at, but I hope that helps. That's all for now. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.